Record. Alrighty, hi everyone. Welcome to today's Tech Tuesday. My name's Vanessa, and today we have Drew Wright with the Wood Library, who's going to be talking about CB Insights. This is a new topic for us. Really excited that he could join us and talk to you guys a little bit about it. Before we begin, I just wanted to mention that this session is being recorded. So after we're done with the session, I'll take the recording, post it online, and send everyone the details via email so that you can, look at it again or share it with any colleagues that may be interested who couldn't attend today. And if you have any questions at any point during the session, feel free to hit the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom window and post any questions in there. And Drew will, when he's got a chance in his presentation, I'll go through the questions with him and answer anything you might be curious about. So without further ado, Drew, thanks for joining us today and tell us a little more about CB Insights.
Cool, thanks, Vanessa. So like she mentioned, I'm going to be talking about CB Insights, which is a kind of business database that looks primarily at private equity, like startups and the sort of venture companies that fund these kind of smaller emerging private companies, and provides a kind of a dollop of market research on top of that. So if you haven't played around with kind of these business-centric databases before, they're more of like a yellow pages or like an index or a directory than sort of a traditional literature database. So what CB Insights actually is and what it provides is it gives a ton of information, and I mentioned before, on private companies and investors focusing on startups and venture capitalists and other types of companies that are involved in that space. So what you'll typically get when you're looking for companies or topics in CB Insights is funding and investing history for companies on both sides of those transactions. Key players in each company, so who the COOs, who the CEOs are, people who you should reach out to, as well as stock and investment news. So kind of unrelated to acquiring funding, you can also get very detailed stock information on up and coming businesses, things like IPO dates, initial public offerings, and balance sheets and stuff like that are very helpful if you're involved in that space, even as a retail investor. And then you'll get some market reports. That's not really the focus of CB Insights, and they're sort of so pre-digested that they're really broad and not always super helpful. But sometimes you'll kind of stumble onto a report that's very useful and interesting for you. There are a good amount of similar products that are available out there. Probably most well-known of those are Crunchbase or PitchBook. And sort of the big practical difference between CB Insights and those other tools are that we have a license to CB Insights and we don't have a license to Crunchbase and PitchBook. So they do cover a very similar territory. So if you're talking to someone, or if you stumble across an article or a report that's available on Crunchbase, PitchBook, Owler, there's a couple other kind of well-known options, you might be able to find something similar in CB Insights. So just as a heads up to let you know that there are other comparable programs out there. And a very common question we get asked is the CB of CB Insights Crunchbase? And it's not, they're two different companies. The CB actually, I believe, stands for Chubby Brain. So Chubby Brain Insights, they shortened it to CB for obvious reasons, and then Crunchbase are two different programs. But probably like a couple times a year we get asked whether or not they're the same company or not, and they are not, just weirdly similar names. So that's a very broad overview of what you can sort of expect when we go into CB Insights. So we're going to pop in just a second, and I'll give you a little tour of the interface and the kind of information you can get for each of these resources as we go forward. But first of all, how do you actually access this? So it's not something that Weill Cornell owns independently. We get our license from Cornell Ithaca. So there are a few caveats to having to access this. First of all, you have to be on a WCN network. So that's either on campus or connected to the VPN. And if you've never connected remotely with the VPN before, this link here will take you to the ITS page that kind of walks you through that process. So if you're not on campus or connected to VPN, you will not be able to access CB Insights. It's not supported by our proxy system, so you can't use the same kind of workflow that you use to get to journal articles, for instance. It's a completely separate kind of thing through VPN. You have to access the actual program through Cornell Ithaca's library. So there's a link here that takes you directly to Cornell's management library, and you can direct link from there. Or here is a link to our medical market research guide that I maintain down here at Weil, which also might have some additional information that you might find pretty helpful. A couple other databases that are available as well. So once you do that, the very first time you sign up, you have to make an account. That's free accounts, don't worry about that, with either a cornell.edu email address or a med.cornell.edu address. I assume for the purpose of this call, it's going to be mostly med.cornell.edu folks. But once you do that, you should be all set to go with your CB Insights account. So I'm just going to jump out real quick. But before I kind of get into the actual program, does anyone have any questions about access? Because that's honestly the trickiest part of the whole thing.
No questions in the chat right now, but guys, and if you do have any during the session, feel free to type them in there and we'll answer them for you.
Cool, thanks. So here's the interface. I'm literally just going to step through some of the features and functions that I use that I find most helpful. And then I'll sort of let you know what my general approach to using the tool is. It might be different than yours once you get in and play around. But I heavily encourage you to just pop in, click around, see what you can find, and see what's available to you. You're not going to really mess anything up or break anything, so you can kind of go nuts when you're messing around with this kind of stuff. So first of all, I'm going to play with these things called collections. So I'm going to start with expert collections. And the best way to describe this is just a sort of a curated list of companies that fall into particular disciplines or sectors. So we'll have the most recent updated ones up here, and we have this kind of whole huge list of lists that are maintained by the experts in the company. So I'm going to jump down to telehealth, since that's a very hot area at the moment. So if we click on the telehealth connection, it's going to display eventually a list of companies that have been sort of indexed as being in the telehealth space. You get a lot of data based on what's available in the database, including funding information, exit date. If you're not familiar with exit date, for the purposes of CB Insights, that basically means they've been acquired or that they have issued an IPO, and so now they're publicly traded. So now they're not necessarily going to be tracked by a tool like CB Insights anymore. If they've been acquired, who's acquired them, things that you might find helpful when looking at potential companies or investors. So you can either look at this huge list, or you can view it as a map, which I think is actually very interesting because it sort of breaks it down into specific types and kind of subcategories within the telehealth space. And you'll see it breaks it down into software platforms, prescriptions, concierge, diagnostics, engagements, blah, 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 blah. And you get to look at icons and logos, which is a little more interesting to me. So if there's something that's interesting to you, you can click through it. There's familiar names here, things like ZocDoc, Capsule, Oscar, some companies that are pretty well known that are still kind of technically in the private startup space. They haven't been acquired or gone public yet. So you can click on any of those, which we'll do in a second. Another way to view this information is through this dossier button, which is kind of the most powerful tool that CB Insights has. So the dossier button essentially generates a slide deck, presentation style slide deck based on the companies that are in that collection. So if you ever wanted to get a very broad, quick look at a bunch of companies that are in the same kind of space, you can do that with the dossier button. It's being very slow to respond here. But what that does is it gives you, some interesting graphs that you might want to look at. It gives you a bit of a rundown. You can click through and see what types of companies are being invested by these types of investors, where companies are in their deal stage. So if you're not familiar with kind of how startups work, there's several stages. Starting with seed stage, sometimes there's a pre-seed stage, that's the initial investment. And then each sort of investing round gets a series letter after it. So Series A, Series B, I've seen Series H's. So each time a company sort of moves on to the next phase before going public or getting acquired, they add another letter to the thing. So this gives you a kind of an idea of the companies that are in the telehealth space and where they are in their series. So, 5 years ago, there was a ton that were in the very early stages, and now there's more and more companies that are kind of moving up and less companies that are entering the space. So if you were thinking about entering the telehealth space, this might be something that you would want to look into. Why aren't more companies doing this? Again, you can step through to deal size, what kind of companies, where they're located, geographically in the US, a bit of a heat map for what types of industries the telehealth space is in. And then we have exits, which I mentioned before, are either IPOs or acquisitions. So it tracks the amount of money per year spent on those funding types. And again, just as much information as you could possibly want. Who the big players are, who's making the most money by getting funded. Oscar's up there. Again, Verily, all names that you are probably familiar with if you pay attention to this space. Who the top investors are. This year, it's all Paycheck Protection Program loans. So that's sort of a blip, an outlier in the actual data, but it's going to be there for literally every topic that we look at. And who's acquiring these companies. So, a company like Teladoc is making a lot of acquisitions, last year 1, last 2 years 3. And we'll click into one of these in a little bit so you can actually see what these types of companies and what the data level, or what the company level information looks like. So I'm going to get out of that. So any questions about the dossier view?
We didn't have a question about the dossier view so much as we did have a question from John Wagner saying, so the program only tracks privately held companies?
Yes. And if it is a company that started out private and has since gone public, it will still have that information, but it won't always have as much information as up to date as the private companies. So we can look at a company that's gone public in a second, so you can see what kind of information is there.
Okay, we got one more question. Can we select a basket of companies to then compare across metrics to do competitive analysis versus within an area?
Yes. So that's actually what I was going to show next.
Oh, okay, perfect. Cool. Awesome. Go ahead then.
So when we were at the collections, we saw that there was expert collections that were sort of pre-digested lists, but you can also make your own collections based on groupings of companies that you are familiar with or that you want to take a look at. So I just went through very quickly and grabbed a couple of WCM companies that are being tracked in CB Insights. And you can make your own collection with that. And then you can do the same information. You can do the same process with the dossier in your custom collection. There's not a ton of activity on the 4 companies that I selected, so the dossier view is a little limited. But you could do that with any number of companies that you decided you wanted to include and look at. So this gives you the same view, funding activity by dates and by investor, where we are in our stages, and a little bit of information to go along with that. And you can do that with, again, any number of companies and any number of industries. Obviously we're all in healthcare, all of our wild industries, but we could pretty much do whatever we wanted in that, using that custom collection if you wanted to. Does that answer your question?
I'll wait for them to respond, but if you want to go ahead.
I will move on. So that's,
Yeah, thanks, thanks.
okay, cool. That's kind of starting your search in the collections view. So again, if you wanted to have either specific or a very sort of like broad um, uh, topic that you wanted to look at. Another way to do sort of a similar thing is to start in this industry analytics tab. And that lets you drill down into specific areas that you might be interested in. So there's a couple ways to do that. I'm going to skip actually heat map for right now and come back to it. CB Insights has this metric they called the mosaic, and it's essentially a ranking of activity. So how many transactions are being made, how much money is being put through, new companies, exits, and a couple other metrics that they've kind of gone through. And a good way to see just kind of what's going on, if you're not looking for something specific, is to go to the mosaic tab, and sort by mosaic. So at the top, you're going to get kind of the quote unquote like hottest areas. So the areas that have the most activity going on. And you'll see again, this is another very large list. It kind of keeps going and going and going. And these are more broad topics than the collections were. So there's not a telehealth topic, but there is a healthcare biotech, which is, a little different, but we'll click into that so you can see what kind of information you get from using the analytics approach. So you get a chart of the mosaic score over time. So, I mean, all these are almost always going to be flat lines, unless it's something that really just blows up, from year to year, like drug discovery, for example, kind of like goes up. So this just lets you see how things are changing on a year basis. You get a little bit of information on trending companies. Again, that's usually related to deals and money. Top financing, so who's getting the most money. And top exits, so who is getting highest valuations while they're going to the private sector or the public sector. So we'll use this one as an example. The exits are actually good companies to look at because they typically have every piece of information that is available. So if you want to see the full picture, we'll look at one of these. So we've got a company like Alexion, was acquired in December. So it gives us pretty much all the information that we can expect from a tool like this. We get a little stock information. We'll be like, okay, what happened here? And that is the acquisition date. So the market really liked that AstraZeneca went out and snagged them. It gives you your balance sheet. So again, this is also very helpful to you to know for investing purposes. You can break it down by previous years or quarterly. Balance sheet and cash flow for things if you're interested in that. And it's also nice to serve as a sort of benchmark if you're wondering what these values should look like for a company like this or a company that you are trying to aspire to. It lists the transactions. So these are all of the investments and acquisitions. So it tells you who is making the investment in the company. It gives you the amounts and if there's other companies involved. So for instance, 2014, Moderna and AstraZeneca sort of teamed up and partnered with the company for a Series E funding. Series D was this. It doesn't seem to have information for their Series B or C funding rounds, but it gives you all the information that is available for you. It also tells you any acquisitions that have happened. Prior to the company themselves being acquired, the company acquired these particular companies as part of their growth. More information about the funding. So acquired by AstraZeneca for a pretty hefty amount. Prior to that, a good chunk of time ago, they made a public offering. And then before that, and here's the information for their Series B and C fundings. So nice little growth there for this particular company. Again, information on investors, more specific information about exits. It also gives you a breakdown of all the news articles that it's discovered. And this is something that gets overlooked a lot, I think, when people are using this tool, is it gives you what they call network and service providers. So what's really nice about this is if you don't have counsel, you can actually look at similar companies to yours and see who they're using for counsel, what kind of banking services they use. Whatever is available here, they will have that information for you, which is very nice. In addition to that, it gives you, COO, CEO, president, vice president, senior vice presidents, all the people that are associated with that particular company. That might be interesting if you're doing market research and who the players are in those particular spaces. Any information about or any questions about the basic company view?
There was a question about whether private equity funds are included.
I believe some of them are. I have to have an example to look it up, but off the top of my head, I don't know if everything is, but I would have to check it out. But I believe they are. Don't quote me on that. So any other questions about that?
Not that I can see. So if you want to move ahead, that's cool.
Cool. So I mentioned that the flip side of that is looking at who the kind of funders are. So we'll check out one of their kind of series funders, Oak Investment. So this kind of gives you all of the information that you would be interested in if you were looking at this company as an investor, as a potential investor. So an approach that a lot of people take is find similar companies that you sort of align yourself with and see who's investing in them. And then pop into their investor profile and see what kind of activity they have going on. So you can see what companies they are investing in, where those companies are in their series, who their co-investors are. It also lets you know what kind of exits they handle. So Oak Investment typically works with companies that have acquisition or get acquired rather than offer an IPO. I'm not familiar enough with how that process works to make a guess or a hazard about that, but that might be interesting to you if that's what you're interested in pursuing. So a company like One Medical that they worked with, fairly well known, worked with until they were an IPO, but everything else seems to have been acquired. So that particular investment in a funding agency. And again, the same information that's available, key people, who their service providers are, who their counsel is, news articles, things like that. Cool. So any questions about using the industry analytics button?
None that I see yet.
Cool. So you can also drill down. I mentioned the heat map before. You can drill down, so you can get into healthcare and then look at these other specific healthcare topics. So if we wanted to say medical devices, you can just keep clicking down until you hit the end of the chain. And when you don't get any more information here, you just click see more charts, and that bumps you into this view that we looked at before, where again, not just the individual companies, but also who the top investors are. Again, Paycheck Protection Program is going to be topping every single thing right now from the previous year, and this is like one of the least useful graphics I've ever seen. But you can sort of click through and see who the players are in that particular field. If you're only interested in private equity, you can just unclick all of the things that you're interested in, that you're not interested in, sorry. So not a ton of players in this particular space. Cool, so those are the two main ways to browse. You can also search. The search is not the greatest, but it is a great way to get to another type of view that you might be interested in. So if you just wanted to look for telehealth, it's gonna search basically all of the metadata for each company for telehealth, and it also lets you know if there's a collection for that particular group. So if this were me and I was just doing a broad telehealth search, I would do this search and then just be like, oh, there's already a collection for telehealth. I'll just click on that, and then it takes us to the collection that we're already familiar with. there's not enough information or not enough records in these databases to really warrant a really advanced, crazy search. Browsing typically does it for you, but if you wanted to, you can click on advanced filters and have this information available to you. So if you wanted to do telehealth and then wanted to look at only things that were in their seed round. And now it just basically applies a filter to that telehealth list, if that's something that is interesting to you. Funding amount. Lots of information that you can play around with here. And that's a search, very straightforward. And again, it's mostly useful for me for getting to a collection and starting that kind of browse process or playing around with the filters. One more thing I'll mention is the research option. So this is where you're going to get your market reports. There was a health one that was popped up earlier today that seemed like it might have been interesting. So state of healthcare reports, sector and investment trends. So if you're thinking about getting started with something, or if you are kind of a retail investor that's looking at potential stocks to buy, these types of reports are great to have, and they're part of our subscription. So you don't have to pay, the $3,500 fee for generating these kind of reports, which you'd have to outside of our subscription. Pretty useful information. There's all sorts of other industry reports that are available here. But like I said, they're very broad, and I tend to just pop in every now and then instead of doing a search to see what's new and what's coming down the pipeline. The only other thing I'll point out is this bulk search option. So if the data that you were getting from the collections dossier was not quite what you wanted more information, they allow a bulk search option, which basically you download a template, you fill out one of the fields with the CB Insights URL, and then you re-upload it, and then it populates all of that data and spits it back out to you. So you can get literally every piece of data that is part of the CB Insights database for like a large number of companies. So if you had 300 companies that you wanted to pull all of their data in a tabular way, instead of having to maybe copy paste or rely on the dossier to do it for you, the bulk search is a great place to do that, and it works pretty well on top of that, which is great. Other than that, the other kind of features, stories, the advanced search, and the safe searches, I don't really use a lot. I focus mostly collections and industry analytics when I'm kind of answering questions about that kind of stuff. Any questions overall?
There was one from Dina, and I think this was when you were showing kind of like the news stories features. And please correct me if I'm wrong, Dina. Can they be saved to PDF to view later?
That's a good question. Let's look right now. I've never actually done that before. Let's take a look. I would assume yes. Or no.
Or
let's see. Oh, download now. Yeah. So yes, you can.
Oh, it looks like yes. Awesome. So the answer is yes.
And like if you've downloaded market reports, they are very hefty. So we're looking at a lot of stuff here, which is great.
Yeah, it's actually really visually appealing. I kind of like how they put the report together.
Yeah, no, the dossier feature is great. Just having that sort of like on-demand visualization is very helpful to do. And yeah, the reports themselves are very nice. So any other questions?
I don't see any yet. Anything else that you want to show us about how the tool works, Drew?
So not really about the tool, but let me just bump back to my.
Oh, somebody just asked about accessing it. If you could go over it one more time.
Sure. So you have to be connected to VPN first off. And then the easiest way is to bookmark this link. Yeah. We have to access it through Cornell Ithaca. They sort of have a license here, but they allow us access. So if you are on VPN, which I'm not at the moment, but you can connect to CB Insights that way. Once you're connected, you can get off VPN and still have access to it. I'm off VPN right now because doing Zoom calls when I'm on VPN really slows everything down. So I logged on to VPN, connected, and then logged back off, and I'm still able to have access to everything.
And just so everyone knows, I'll be sure to send the login details again through email after the session, just so you don't have to like write any of this down. I'll make sure that you get it all, that you can save it in your email and access it whenever you want.
Thank you. Any other questions about CB Insights?
Not yet.
Cool. So if you are actually going to go down the path of kind of thinking about starting a startup, or even thinking about doing that, the first place you should always start in that regard is with the Cornell Center for Technology Licensing. That is sort of a great resource for all of our entrepreneurs at Cornell, the Tech Campus, Weill Cornell, and some of our other related institutions. They're going to want to know a little bit about what you're trying to do, and they'll be able to direct you and make sure everything's kind of handled and the legal side of things if you have not done anything like this before. Is there anyone from CTL on the call by any chance? Sometimes there is.
No one has identified themselves.
Okay.
But somebody did ask, can you walk us through how to best gather investor due diligence if we are fundraising actively?
Not on this call. But if you want to reach out to me, so let me put up my email address. Because for something like that, I might not be the best person to talk to. I might kick you up to some of the business librarians that Ithaca has, who do support a good chunk of our researchers as well. So we have a lot of sort of cross-pollination with some of our programs with the Tech Campus, and we have an executive MBA program that Weill Cornell is part of. And then we're starting to sort of blur the lines a little bit more. So depending on how in-depth you want to go, I might put you in touch with the business people in Ithaca, or I might be able to help you out as well.
Awesome. I don't see any other questions, but again, Drew has given us a ton of information on accessing it and resources for assistance, and also his own contact information. I'll make sure that everybody gets these details via email after the session, just so if you have any questions after this, you can feel free to reach out as well. We'll also be sending out a really quick survey about today's session. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a few minutes just to give us a little feedback, it helps us, provide the best sessions we possibly can in the future too. So Drew, is there anything else that you want to share before we sign off?
No.
Awesome.
It's a pretty exciting space to be in. So we're always looking for more people to kind of collaborate with. So if you have an idea about something, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Drew. This is a really cool tool. I'm actually really happy to learn more about it myself. I didn't even know that we had access to this, so it was really great to see. And thank you all for joining us for today's session. And I'll be in touch later today with the recording of the session and the details Drew provided. So have a great day, Drew. Thanks again for hosting the session. I really appreciate it.
Sure, no problem.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Yes. Bye.
Bye-bye.